Guten Abend. Es ist meine große Ehre, heute eingeladen zu sein, mit Ihnen zu sprechen. Ich wünschte natürlich, ich könnte persönlich dabei sein, um diese Veranstaltung mit Ihnen allen in vollen Zügen zu genießen. Stattdessen sende ich dieses Video, um meine Familiengeschichte im Rückerstattungsfall von Albert Pollock zu teilen. Ich muss zugeben, mein Deutsch ist wirklich nicht so gut. Meine Eltern sprachen in der Gruppe immer weniger Deutsch, sodass ich über den Wortschatz einer 5-Jährigen verfüge. So, bitte entschuldigen Sie also, wenn ich auf Englisch weiterspreche. Yes, it is certainly easier for me to speak to you in English. But before I begin, I'd like to thank the many shareholders, the people who have made this event and the restitution possible, including the Ministry of Culture, especially Pia Schoenberger and Julia Unterweger, the Art Restitution Advisory Board, the Commission of Providence Research, the staff at the Kunsthistorische Museum for staging this auspicious event, particularly George Plattner, the curator of KHN's Greek and Roman collection. And I must add a special note of appreciation to Israelische Kultusgemeinde Wien, IKG, whose staff member, Matthias Lichtenwagner, has played such a key role in making the restitution case of Albert Pollock successful. So much work has been done to support the first stage of our successful restitution of the estate of my great-uncle, Albert Pollock, to his remaining heirs. And that indeed is a cause for celebration. But I felt it would be more significant at this point, rather than going into the full details of the restitution case, to speak briefly about my family's story in this whole process, particularly through the lens of one of the heirs, my father, Paul Sternfeld. I wanted to give you a personal glimpse of what it feels like to finally have justice be served, how we experienced the confiscation of our family's art by the Nazis, our expulsion from Austria, and ultimately the return of the artwork to our family. So let's go back to the beginning of the century, and we can see how this story unfolded, how we became heirs to Albert Pollock. This must have been an amazing time in fin de siècle Vienna, the turn of the century. And this is when Albert Pollock and his brothers and sisters came to Vienna from an area of Poland that was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Already coming from a wealthy family, when they got to Vienna, they were living a very fashionable, high society life. And it seems that already in his early 20s, Albert Pollock was collecting art as a beloved hobby. Later, he added to his wealth by becoming an industrialist in the textile industry when he founded the Allgemein Wohlhandels AG. So by the end of the 30s, or by the mid-30s, in addition to his developing business empire, he had already amassed quite an impressive art collection of over 800 fine art objects and antiques. Next came the connection between the Pollock family and the Sammet family. My father's mother, my grandmother Sidonie Sternfeld Sammet, married to Ludwig Sternfeld, was supposedly one of the most beautiful women in Vienna and actually appeared in Kaiser Franz Josef's 50th anniversary coronation parade, which would have been in, I think, 1908. She also had two very aristocratic-looking brothers, Leo Sammet, who was a well-known gynecologist in Vienna, and Gabor Sammet, who also worked in the family's art and antique business, which was founded by their father, Michael Sammet, who I'm named after. So that was our family business as well. It was through Gabor that we made the connection between the Sammet family and the Pollock family, when Gabor married Albert Pollock's niece, Stella Pollock. My father, just as an aside, told me he was one of Stella's favorite nephews, and later I actually remember meeting Stella several times, both when she came to the US with Gabor and also when we visited her in England. A very refined, aristocratic woman wearing white gloves in the Viennese style, and I was always very impressed with her level of refinement. Moving into the 30s, both the Pollock and the Sternfeld Sammet families led a good life in Vienna. And even through the Depression, our families did quite well, either in the art or the textile business. My father's older brother, Ernst Sternfeld, had already graduated from medical school by the late 30s, while my father was in engineering school. But by the late 30s, as you know, things began to change rapidly with the rise of fascism in Germany, and then the Anschluss in Austria in 1938. Virtually overnight, with Kristallnacht in November 1938, our lives were forever transformed. Our good life in Vienna crumbled with the Nazi seizure of our family's business, along with the confiscation of Albert Pollock's extensive art collection, well documented by Julia Unterweger with the Providence team at the ministry. I can only imagine the devastating feeling that Albert Pollock must have had to lose his lifelong collection of art and completely being denied access to his office building on Lindestrasse, where his collection was stored, as well as at his villa in Hinterbrühl. Our families essentially lost everything. But even though the next 6 months after Kristallnacht in Vienna was a horror, filled with arrests, harassments, and brutality almost every single day, most of our family managed to escape the impending Holocaust. My uncle Leo Samek, for example, was a gynecologist to some of the Maharanis from India, and through those connections he gained passage to India, later serving as a medical officer in the British Army in the British Indian Army throughout the war. But Gabor and Stella managed to escape to England, where Stella was only able to get a visa by serving as a Dienstfrau. And I can't imagine the high-class women like Stella actually earning a living as a cleaning woman. But at that time, you would do anything you could to survive. My father's brother, since he was a medical doctor, was able to get an affidavit to come to the U.S. And finally, once he arrived in the U.S., was able to get an affidavit from my father, who came in the late spring of 1939 to the U.S. and landed in Chicago. His parents managed to somehow get out by sneaking across the Italian border and didn't get out till 1941 on the last passenger ship to the U.S. All of our family members had to integrate into whatever countries they could enter at the time, but slowly began to carve out a life. But my grandparents and later my parents, my father was married to Elfriede Hosel Sternfeld, who was also from Vienna. We all had the hopes that there would be some restitution, both of our family's business and, as we later found out, the Pollock collection, the extensive collection. But when Gabor Samek and Stella Pollock passed away in the late 60s and early 70s in England, their estates were willed to my grandmother, Sidonie, and in turn later to her two sons, Ernst and my father, Paul, who ended up making it a personal mission to find some pathway for the successful restitution of all these art objects. Now, the turning point came in 2006 when Austria's Grundpartei invited my father to come to Vienna. They wanted some family member from the Pollock line or extended Pollock line to give family approval for the transfer of that major Pollock commercial building on Lindengasse to the Grundpartei. And this was an extraordinary homecoming for my father. And even though he had already visited Vienna several times, this was a turning point in the sense that he and our family was now being honored by the government, and more so, that it was an event attended by the former Chancellor of Austria, the ambassador to Israel, and other Viennese officials. And my father, who was a relatively quiet man, was asked to speak. There was press conferences and a plaque made. They really made it into a major event. And it was at that time that we became more and more aware of the new restitution laws in Austria, and he made the acquaintance of historian Tina Walzer, who had recently completed extensive research on the Pollock collection and its confiscation by the Nazis. And then my father began working closely on this restitution case with some of the museum officials like the Wien Museum and other Jewish organizations, including IKG. Things moved a little slowly at first due to bureaucracy, as well as a lack of consensus among the heirs on how to proceed. But the next major turning point happened in 2017 or 18, when Matthias Lichtenwagner from IKG came on the scene, determined to see our case move forward towards resolution. At that time, my father was already quite old. He must have been just turning 100, and he gave me the power of attorney to try to continue our epic saga and to reclaim this legacy that was lost. And one holdup continued on the side of the heirs that we could not come to an agreement on who would represent us. And there was also a lot of uncertainty on even what the value of all these art objects were. So we were incredibly fortunate that Mr. Lichtenwagner, after some gentle persuasion on my part, and with the approval of his superiors, agreed that IKG could not only would be able to represent the case as a whole, but also that Matthias could legally represent the family in this restitution case, all the families. This was the major breakthrough. And I can truly say that it was only due to Matthias's incredible diligence, perseverance, and skill in action that our case was successfully resolved. Now with 21 objects from 7 museums all across Austria being returned to the heirs and put up at auction by the Dorotheum auction house. Now, with 5 heirs and 7 museums involved, it was really a logistical and administrative challenge, but Matthias saw it all the way through. And I have to say, along the way, it was really quite a thrill of watching this process, all these pieces coming up at auction. And with the Dorotheum, by the way, graciously waiving their commissions. And to watch some of the pieces selling for considerably more than their appraised value, including this beautiful gem-encrusted crystal goblet and 2 paintings by Rudolf von Alt. I believe that was from the Graz Museum. But even though my father passed away at the ripe old age of 102 before most of these pieces were sold, he did get some special gratification from the process. It was on the occasion I remember really well of his 102nd birthday that Matthias and Pia Schoenberger and my father and I met for a Zoom meeting to brief him on progress. And Pia surprised us by having this letter from the Cultural Secretary of State, Andreas Meyer, in which Andreas not only honored my father on his birthday, but also gave him a formal apology from Austria for everything that had occurred during the Anschluss, which so deeply affected him and our family. So when I look back at this whole restitution process, that may have actually been that meeting and that reading that letter was probably the most significant event, because my father had never received a formal apology. This touched him deeply, and he was brought to tears. And all of us on that call were deeply moved by this unexpected turn of emotion and events. So anyway, I've gone on quite some time. I hope my retelling of the story has somehow touched you in some way as well, to see this whole process coming around full circle as a team of very committed people, both in Austria and the Jewish organizations, to see this to the end and see that these amends needed to be made. Things needed to be set right. And through this process, really both sides benefit. Our family, all the heirs, including my cousins Ruth Mesnil and her brother William Sternfeld, my sister Karen Rollins, as well as Mrs. Posilis of the Jewish United Fund, have benefited by seeing and experiencing firsthand that justice was served. The art objects were returned. And of course, we enjoyed the benefit of the financial restitution from the sale of these objects. But equally important, all the people at the museums who restituted, both federal and the provincial museums, also, I believe, derived an equal benefit by doing the right thing, the right action, and in doing so, restoring a sense of faith that all can be good in the world. And I think you might agree that we all need a lot of that right now. So I'm hoping this serves as a reminder as we move forward. We've discovered through recent research that we're over 800 objects in Albert Pollock's collection. 21 have been restituted. There were some early pieces restituted in the 50s to some of the heirs, but many pieces, if they can be found, may still be out there in other provincial museums, or more likely even in private collections. So I hope my retelling of the story is a call to action for anyone who may still be harboring pieces from Albert Pollock's estate and all of his art to begin the restitution process and set things right. And also, I believe this story may serve as an inspiration to other Jewish families who may still be in the process of recovering stolen property and art to persevere. But today, it's a cause for celebration to see that we're all moving in the right direction. And I deeply appreciate the work, commitment, and follow-through of everyone involved here, with the Kunsthistorische Museum staging this event to honor Albert Pollock's legacy, IKG, and the ministry, and all the organizations that have played such a significant role in these proceedings. I thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to coming to Vienna, perhaps in the fall, and meeting you all in person. Thank you so much.